LinkedIn. We're back again. How are you, Dean? How's life?
I'm good. Just got back from a really lovely holiday. I'm going to the gym later and then for a meal. It's really good.
He's absolutely lying. He just told me how he trod under the dog's foot. So, he's an evil person. So this is our opportunity to hopefully put a smiley face, share some insights that are going on and answer a few questions from our members who are talking about things that are that matter to them. Now, here's one. And I did ask Dean how I should frame this, but I just, there's nothing like me being as authentic as I can. So the only way I could really say it is how I feel about it. It's been very interesting since coming back in 2021 that how many people have been phoning up their tame recruitment agencies to ask for some aggressive, with a small a, positive discrimination so they can tick a box in terms of their internal hires to get a bonus. Now, I'm sure that isn't why that we were trying to equalize things in the world. Discrimination is wrong in any way, shape or form, positive or not in my mind. But Dean, you've got some really interesting points on this. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd throw it over to you to say, what on earth is happening in the world and what can we do to make it a better place right now?
I think it's something that's been around forever. Racism's not a new thing. Sexism's not a new thing. Ageism's not a new thing. Heightism isn't a new thing. But somebody will always find something different about somebody else. And I think we've become a much more equal society in many ways. But then divisions are quite easily driven. And I think 2020 saw that. It's a tough one because it's not as if the law can do anything about it, because the law already works very, very well in terms of how the law is represented. The Equalities Act of 2010 works well, was an update from 2005. So that's already in place. I don't think you've been able to, is it 1976, pay women differently from a man? So, there are laws already in place. And I think where people talk about diversity and inclusion, they're talking more about how to remove unconscious bias, how to create a culture that embraces unique, that has those. There's a lot of workings around diverse environments and engaged environments give better outcomes and are more representative of the world. And no matter who you are, you, me. You have an unconscious bias. Your unconscious bias is that perm consultants aren't as good as contract consultants. Maybe that.
True.
But it can be anything: race, religion, gender, disability. We have confirmation bias. We see someone who looks like our last top biller. They've got the same knot in their tie and the same loafers on, and they walk through the door with the same swagger, and we think they're going to go out there and bill £1 million, and they fall flat on their face in 3 months. And so I think diversity and inclusion is just about awareness, is making sure that you are aware that, we all have this background that was being brought up in a certain area with certain kinds of people, seeing certain kinds of things. And also, especially when we were young as well, there would have been a lot of things we saw on TV that did leave a woman just cleaning and a man out working and dinner was on the table and whatever else. And the world has changed. I don't necessarily think we need reminding of that all the time because we're living in that world. We don't do that anymore. That's just not part of us. But we need to make sure that it doesn't leak back into our processes and our workforce and how we present things.
But I get really frustrated when I hear these stories and it's prolific. I mean, it's not, we're talking about one or two. There's lots of this going on, where people are just saying, exactly, they're almost like shopping to order exactly the person that they're after, not the skill set. Mm. There are technology fixes out there that can help with this. There's advancement that people can build in systems and processes, so you take away any of those biases. That's there today, but what people are doing, they're not investing in that as a suite of products or a technology or a process internally. They're throwing it at recruiters, and they're effectively asking us to break the law. That's what they're asking, and that's just fundamentally wrong.
They can't ask you. I mean, you can't write adverts for that. I remember doing some work in Dubai many years ago, and I was asked whether or not I could put a recruitment solution in for a group of hospitals there. And while I was there with HR, they gave me this lovely list, and it just seemed like a list of countries to me, but it was an ethnicity pay scale. And the Americans were this was in the hospital, Americans were at the top, then the British, and they loved South Africans because they could pay them less and they were white. And essentially the Emiratis wanted to be treated by what they thought. So that was 2002-3. And I just said, look, no, this isn't for me. We can't do this. We don't live in a society like that. I think we don't. There are obviously fractions on all sides who have different views and different biases. But if you positively discriminate too heavily, and you use weighted bias in your algorithms and whatever else, one way over another way, it doesn't matter which way, you will cause problems with the other side. Newton's third law, you'll get an equal and opposite reaction in terms of sentiment. And that's where I think diversity and inclusion needs to make sure that it's got the right steering committees, it's got balance in terms of who's working on those. Things can be questioned. You need to be able to question them with a certain viewpoint to make sure that you haven't been biased by anything in your makeup.
So anonymization is obviously a very easy, very quick fix. Do you think that limits the applications that any organization is going to get? But by driving at the front of their process, some form of anonymization, pre-testing, so that actually the face-to-face element is almost right at the end of a process, would that have any negative impact on the business in terms of the quality of candidate they can get?
It shouldn't do, because it encompasses all. I've got a system, a platform that works in education. You click one button, and it removes certain information before the end client can see it. You would come up as GG. It wouldn't say your last place of work. It wouldn't give your age. Wouldn't give your sex. It would have your competencies on there. It wouldn't say what university you went to. All those types of things that they went to Oxford University, so they must be amazing. And I think Google were quite big on this many years ago, where they worked out they were hiring from all the Ivy Leagues, but they weren't getting any creativity. They were just getting massive brains. And so that's an example of having a diverse workforce. And you need people that look at things in different ways. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best outcome. And so, as a starting point, recruitment's where most unconscious bias comes in, where people get hired to do a role, because once you're in that role, you perform, you're measured, and those measures are equal in terms of the standard measures within a business. Yes, there can be problems with promotions if they're just dependent on somebody's view and they're very subjective, but you as a business can put those measures in place to make sure that maybe the person who's making the decision on a hire has never met that individual. They've just looked at the reports of 3 people coming from different angles and different views, and they put together the competencies versus the structures and the job spec, and then they shortlist themselves, then they meet those individuals. And I've seen that work, and it's amazing what people see isn't really what they thought in their head. It's a bit like when you speak to somebody on the phone at a call center and you're imagining what they look like, and or you meet someone that you've been speaking to for ages and they look completely different. We are all biased in that way. And I think anonymization is the fairest way to do it. But to make anonymization work, you have to make it unbiased. You have to make it very, very vanilla at certain levels. Even your profiling, your algorithms need to make sure that they're not biased in any way in terms of what you're doing. It's a learning function. And to do that, you've got to start off with your own diverse committee, I think.
And you have to know exactly what the competencies that you're looking for. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just going to look for the same boxes, ticking the same things, but they're just different boxes.
Yeah, but that's where we as recruiters help out.
Well, that we know, we've got 300 plus members, and they're all odds and sods and bloody different. Mm-hmm. And the most successful people who run recruitment businesses, there's always we've all got screw loose. We're all slightly nuts and mental, and it's those quirks that give us something that make us really, really successful.
Absolutely. It's, again, as I said at the beginning, it's embracing unique and making sure that you are represented. If you're talking to a client, I mean, we're talking a lot about internally as well, but if you're talking to a client, they may need to see information that you've been fair and just and gone out wide, and your process and whatever else. So if you map it correctly internally, you will reflect the requirements of your client as well, because you will be a diverse culture that embraces all. And that's what you want to present to your client. And sometimes you're not going to be able to, get something that's other than a white male. You're not meant to be looking for that. You're meant to be looking for the right person for the job, because that's the thing that gives the best outcome. But you've got to make sure that you've been fair in every level of that. There are situations where I think weighting does help. If you've been schooled at Eton and Oxford University and you've had all of those, I suppose, additional benefits, then you might have been taught to the highest level that you can achieve at, and you on paper you look amazing. But somebody from a broken home, one parent family who's gone to a local comp, and that's not for me to say that local comprehensives aren't as good as Eton. I went to a state school, which is top in the country. So they can be as good on scores and doors, but they also deal with a lot of different things and behavioural management, classroom management on a different scale. There's a lot of other pressures there. So sometimes you need to look at that weighting, what the journey is. And I know we do that as recruiters. We look at somebody's life journey, not just, they worked at this company, they're McKinsey's consultants, so they'll be great anywhere. And I've stated it before in our Firesides, you can research how often McKinsey's are wrong, and it's more than they're right. And they're pretty poor at actually predicting outcomes, but they're still the go-to for people to pay lots of money and tick a box and say that's right. And that, for me, is a bias. There are a lot of people out there that are far better than McKinsey's, but you're ticking a box.
It's quite interesting. I wrote a piece for LinkedIn, because obviously that's what I do, about white men can code. So actually, a 40-year-old white man don't discriminate against him, because he could be the best kid on the block to do the role that you want. Could be the best person on the block to do the role that you want them to do. And we've both built very successful businesses, and there's not an ounce of bias, a deliberate bias between the pair of us. But I was still trying to get the most eclectic band of brothers together, because that's the one that's going to fight the hardest.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course it is. I think we actually work in an industry where I don't know anybody. I've never met anybody who would hire someone for any other characteristic than they were going to be the best person within that job. They would never hire over who they supported at football, or whether their gender was a certain way, or whatever it might be. And I've just never personally, I've never come up, because it doesn't make sense. We've got no assets. We've only got people, and why hire the worst people? You need to make sure that you're running the most open and fair process possible, because, and I think that's where you can see that's reflected in recruitment companies in terms of their demographic, their makeup. So
recruitment, you're good enough if you're good enough. Should we leave it there?
Good enough if you're good enough. You're good enough if you're good enough. Yeah.
Peace and love. See you soon, bub.
See you later. Bye-bye.